From The National, this is Trending Middle East. I'm Yasmin Al-Taji. It's Wednesday, April 2nd. Here are today's headlines. Israel said it bombed the southern suburbs of Beirut on Tuesday. It's the second such attack in 5 days, this time killing at least 4 people, including a Hezbollah official and a woman. This comes despite a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hezbollah that took effect in November.
Many in Lebanon are asking, what ceasefire? Israel continues to bomb South Lebanon on a daily basis, leaving multiple villages completely uninhabitable.
The National's Jamie Prentis reports from Beirut.
Tuesday morning's attack on Beirut was markedly different than last Friday's. Israel gave no warning of the attack, striking in the middle of the night when people were sleeping during what is normally a happy time amid the Eid holidays.
Residents say the strikes shook them awake.
Zahra, who lives nearby, said she could hear the Israeli jets both before and after the attack in a morbid reminder of last year's war. Hezbollah, for its part, says it has upheld its side of the bargain, including by not attacking Israel.
Lebanese President Joseph Aoun condemned the Israeli strike. He said Israel's persistence in its violence required Beirut to exert greater effort to mobilize international support to prevent further attacks. The continued Israeli attacks on Beirut and other parts of Lebanon are a test for the new Lebanese government, which had hoped to sideline Hezbollah.
From the Lebanese state, there is anger, perhaps tinged with a great deal of frustration. Top Lebanese officials have repeatedly decried what they see as Israel's violations of the ceasefire. Yet despite all of this anger and the calls to the international community, Israel continues to target Lebanon at will.
We're going to Qatar also, and also we're going to possibly a couple of other countries. UAE is very important. It's a great leader in UAE.
U.S. President Donald Trump says the first overseas trip of his second term in office will probably include visits to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. His remarks came after news outlet Axios reported that White House officials are planning Trump's first trip to Saudi Arabia in mid-May as a signal of appreciation for its planned investment in U.S. industry.
This time around, there are multiple things happening at the same time.
The National's Jihan Abdalla reports.
Saudi Arabia and the UAE have announced major investments here in the United States, and President Trump has said these would create many jobs for Americans. And so we expect this to very much have a domestic message.
Trump visited Saudi Arabia during his first term as president after the country made $450 billion worth of investments in U.S. companies. This time, Trump said Riyadh has promised to more than double that amount with a pledge of nearly $1 trillion. It's among promised investments from Gulf countries, particularly in the tech industry. Upon Trump's second election win, the Emirati businessman Hussein Sajwani, behind the developer Damac, announced a $20 billion investment to build data centers in the U.S.
At the same time, Saudi Arabia has taken on a major role in U.S. foreign policy. It just hosted talks aimed at ending the war in Ukraine, and this is, again, a major role for the Trump administration. Saudi Arabia is very much in the eyes, on the list of Trump accomplishments, which he very much wants to see signing on to the Abraham Accords, which the UAE has already signed off on.
The U.S. says Syria's new government is a step in the right direction, but it might not be enough to lift sanctions. The United States said it would not ease sanctions until it has verified progress on priorities, including acting against terrorism. Syria announced its new caretaker government on Saturday. It's set to lead a 5-year term in a test of its promises to reform Syria and protect the country's diverse population. Here's the National's Willy Lowry with more.
The U.S. has welcomed Syria's new transitional government, not a particularly surprising move, but it's not going to do anything rash in terms of its policies towards Syria. So that means it's not going to lift sanctions for the time being. It's really, the Trump administration has really chosen a wait-and-see approach with Syria. they're incredibly cautious of overplaying their hand. They, of course, have vested interests in the country with U.S. troops still in Syria. That's something that President Trump, during his first term, really wanted to change. He wanted to pull U.S. troops out of that country. I would anticipate that they are still looking for ways to get U.S. troops out at some point.
Meanwhile, reports of sectarian violence in Syria continue. At least 12 civilians, mostly Alawites, were killed in separate incidents in Syria's coastal and central regions on Monday. That's according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a UK-based war monitor.
I spoke to a source on Syria in the administration a few weeks ago, right after the SDF announced that it would attempt to fold in to the new government in Damascus at some point in the future. That source really was ecstatic by that decision, thinking it could pave the way for a Syria that represented the entirety of the country and had the support of a really sizable Kurdish minority, but also saw it as an opportunity for the U.S. to pull out at some point.
U.S. State Department spokeswoman Tammy Bruce called on the interim authorities to, quote, take meaningful steps to verifiably destroy Assad's chemical weapons, assist in the recovery of U.S. and other citizens who have been disappeared in Syria, and ensure the security and freedoms of Syria's religious and ethnic minorities, unquote.
Of course, she's really referring to the fact that the government was essentially formed in large part by members of HTS, who were once an offshoot of al-Qaeda. So she is really urging that country to kind of stamp out any nefarious activities within the borders of Syria. But it's a monumental task because the government is inheriting a country whose economy, whose infrastructure is crippled, and whose military strengths are depleted. So Syria certainly has a tall task in front of it, and the U.S. is not going to lend any more of a helping hand than it absolutely needs to.
That's all for this morning's headlines. You can get these stories and follow live updates at our site. Yasmin Altaji, The National.